And now, live from England, bringing you news and analysis that you won't find on the corporate and government mainstream media. It's the WideShut Webcast.
Good evening, everybody. Welcome back to the WideShut Webcast on resistradio.com. I'm your host, Keelan Balderson, and for the next hour or more, if we go past the hour, which we now can on this new system, we're going to be cutting through the mainstream media to bring you an alternative view that isn't clouded by big business or government agendas. If you want to check out my free documentaries on the 7/7 London bombings and last year's rioting, you can find them along with my weekly news coverage at wideshut.co.uk or on the YouTube channel youtube.com/wideshutuk. I'm just going to jump to the chat to check that you can all hear me, because I've been getting some freezing on this new system. It was pretty good last week, but not so good this week. Oh, loud and clear. Good stuff. Anyway, coming up today, new documents prove the obvious. Lockerbie bomber was innocent. And if you look back through all these different incidents, it's kind of hard to find a case of terrorism that hasn't been a lie, to some degree. Now, whether this was a full-blown false flag or simply spun to blame the wrong person for the agenda against Libya, it's not too clear to me yet. I've not done thorough research into it. There's several lines of inquiry that different researchers have gone down. But plainly speaking, Megrahi did not do it. And his release a few years ago on, quote, compassionate grounds should have been the wake-up call really for most people that something wasn't quite right. I mean, when do we ever release people on compassionate grounds? And if it was supposedly this big evil terrorist attack and this guy was 100% guilty, then I don't see the justice system letting this guy go on compassionate grounds, you know. That doesn't make any sense. So we'll be getting into that today. Also, we're going to be going back to an old story that I covered several years ago now, when I first started the website. But it continues to develop. More and more of these incidents are coming out now. And that's this bizarre teaching method where children are being scared, traumatized, with staged events. They'll be sitting in a classroom and some bizarre event will take place, like a shooting or whatever, and they'll be led to believe that it's real, and it turns out the school just staged it. And it supposedly helps them with their creative writing. Children across the UK being subjected to fake alien invasions, shootings, teacher assaults, and Holocaust simulations, leaving them upset and traumatized. And the key to all of this, that suggests to me something perhaps more sinister is going on, is that it's not that there's these performances that the teachers are doing. I mean, the classroom's dull. It'd be a good idea to liven things up and have kind of these interactive lessons, you know, with some visual stimulation rather than, you know, a blackboard or, you know, whiteboards, whatever they have these days. I mean, I'm not exactly old, but the point is, they're led to believe that it's real. They're literally being tricked and traumatized, and they don't tell the parents that these bizarre incidents are going to take place either. The parent doesn't have a decision to make whether they should let their child go to school that day and get scared to death. They're not even told. Sometimes the parents are even led to believe the incident's real themselves. So, pretty bizarre stuff. But I want to kick things off today on the subject of drugs. Huge gasp. Did he say drugs? Drugs are bad. Well, yeah, a lot of drugs are bad. A lot of drugs are also very beneficial. But first off, what is a drug? Because it's a funny word that has taken on a very negative connotation if used outside of mainstream medicine. There's either drugs and they're bad, or doctors give them to you and they're good. There's no middle ground. Here's what Google says in their list of definitions. Some people would argue that Google's a drug. You know, I've got a friend who will be out at a bar somewhere and will most likely be Googling the whole time on his phone. But anyway, this is what Google says. A substance that has a physiological effect when ingested or otherwise introduced into the body. Another definition, a medicine, especially a pharmaceutical preparation, which I guess means it's gone through some kind of procedure to make it pop out into this nice little white pill that you swallow, or a substance taken for its narcotic or stimulant effects, often illegally. So there's 3 definitions on Google in a row, and it's not really clear by those definitions what a drug is. Is it something that has a physical effect? Is it a medicine that cures you of things? Is it a stimulant? Is it all of the above? I mean, there's illegal and legal drugs. What makes one drug a medicine and another drug a bad thing that shouldn't be taken? Is it that it can kill you? Well, lots of medicines can and do kill lots of people every year. And there's also lots of drugs, some legal, some illegal, that don't really kill people at all. Why is it that side effects from medicine that do harm to people, sometimes permanent harm, are acceptable, and side effects from illegal drugs, for example, are not acceptable? How do we measure the definitions? You know, is it down to addiction levels? People taking over-the-counter painkillers, they get addicted to them. People are dropping like flies, especially in America with Oxycontins, which is basically synthetic heroin. There's not really a whole lot of logic. This is what I'm trying to get at. There's not really a whole lot of logic behind society's perception of drugs. What determines what? And just because somebody can be elected to a government or can gain a PhD and they tell me this is bad and this is good, it doesn't necessarily mean they're telling the truth or they're fully aware of all the information. I don't particularly think there's much credibility behind authority when they allow you to drink and smoke yourself to death, and it's legal and for the most part culturally acceptable to do so. Just come to England on any Friday or Saturday night and see that pretty much everybody is getting smashed. But if you eat a chocolate brownie with marijuana in it, then everybody gasps like you've just murdered somebody. So I wanted to share a story today that I think puts a lot of our perceptions on drugs, it kind of twists it upside down and puts it on its head. I brought this up to somebody on Friday who I think started to question, their beliefs on what a drug or, what a drug is or what a drug isn't. Because this story is quite ridiculous. Cancer patient told he can't have liver transplant due to marijuana substance abuse. Paste that in the chat. A cancer patient in LA has been told that he's no longer eligible for a liver transplant because he smokes marijuana. Norman Smith, a liver cancer patient at Cedars-Sinai Hospital in Los Angeles, was on the hospital's waiting list for a life-saving liver transplant. To help deal with pain caused by the cancer and chemotherapy, He was prescribed marijuana by his oncologist, a legal and medically recognized treatment in California. However, under the Transplant program, marijuana is bizarrely considered substance abuse, and Norman has been informed that he is no longer eligible for the new liver. Does that make sense to anybody? An oncologist is a cancer and chemotherapy specialist. Their job is understanding and treating people with cancer. It's what they do. And one thing any oncologist will know is the pain and sickness that patients go through when they're treated with this chemotherapy and radiotherapy. It's not a fun thing to go through. People's hair falls out, their skin goes bad. Long story short, essentially they're being radiated. They're zapping you with cell-destroying radiation, or you're taking drugs. Yeah, there's that word again. That stop your cells from dividing. It's killing you and hopefully the cancer. The aim, obviously, is for the cancer to die before you die. Now, ignore any preconceived notions that you might have. If marijuana makes Norman Smith feel better while his hair's falling out, while he's vomiting and having diarrhea, when he has no appetite, he's too tired to do anything, if having a bit of weed makes him feel better, and an oncologist has prescribed it for that very reason, because it works, is it fair to let him die? If you were in that position, if it was your decision, would you let him die for the crime of trying to feel better? Or would you save his life? It's not a hard question to answer. And I think that's a good example to show people that our perceptions are probably not, they're not in the best standing right now. We need to readdress this stuff. Marijuana is considered substance abuse, says Peggy Stewart, a clinical social worker with UCLA's Transplant program. The legality of it is not really an issue. In other words, what she's implying is that although marijuana has been legalized in the state for medicinal purposes, their policy is to simply ignore the science, something you'd think an LA hospital would be on the cutting edge of. Revealing where her allegiance really lies, Smith explains, there are other ways to treat your pain, meaning there are pills that don't do the job as well as marijuana, but make profits for hospitals and large pharmaceutical manufacturers. In a demoralizing slap in the face, in order to get back on the waiting list, Norman is now required to attend an Alcoholics Anonymous type program for pot, even though he doesn't necessarily struggle with addiction. Now Norman's chances of survival are a long shot, because he's obviously put at the end of the waiting list again. Does that sound fair to you? Would you have made that decision? And you got to remember, this isn't even England. It's legal in California. But for whatever reason, for whatever conflict of interest, this particular transplant program, they're choosing to punish this innocent man for something that isn't even illegal on the state level. And this is another point people struggle with when you bring it up to them. How can marijuana be illegal in some areas of the world, fully developed Western countries at the cutting edge of science, but legal in other parts of the world that are also fully developed Western countries at the cutting edge of science? Why is it illegal in some states but legal in the state of California for medical purposes? Why is it completely decriminalised in the Netherlands, but still illegal in Britain? Why can one oncologist prescribe it for pain relief, but another doctor says it's useless? Who's correct? What it suggests to me is that what we're told by our governments may not always be true. They may be stuck in old systems and patterns of belief, and they're refusing to move with the times, or there's special interests involved. At the very least, it tells me that there's a debate to be had. If some people can make the decision based on the supposed evidence that it's fine and should be legal, and other people based on the supposed evidence say it shouldn't be, that tells me there's a debate. And if there's a debate, what right does the government have to make the final decision? Are we all incapable? Are we children that need parents to tell us what to do? Aren't we allowed to come to our own conclusions? I didn't know David Cameron, for example, was God, and that he has all the answers to the universe. No, politicians generally are just privileged people that have pursued politics. It doesn't automatically make them anybody's moral or intellectual superior. He's just a bloke in a suit. He doesn't know any more than I do. I mean, he may do, but you get my point. The hospital's excuse for labelling Norman a drug addict is that transplant patients who consume marijuana may put themselves at risk from a mould sometimes found in cannabis, called Aspergillus. When patients' immune systems are repressed so their bodies don't reject transplanted organs, this mould has a higher chance of causing infection, as does any other kind of infection that you can get when your immune system is suppressed. However, Aspergillus is a common contaminant of starchy foods such as bread and potatoes, and grows on many plants and trees. It is highly aerobic and is found in almost all oxygen-rich environments. Is eating potatoes substance abuse as well? The truth is that Norman lives in Los Angeles, and there are laboratories that he can take his medicine to and make sure that it doesn't have contaminants, says Stephanie Shearer of the Americans for Safe Access, which works to break down political and legal barriers to medical cannabis. Further, a 2009 study from the American Journal on Transplantation that looked at potential liver transplant candidates said that there wasn't a significant difference between marijuana users from marijuana non-users. Shearer points out that Smith isn't alone. His problems are the reality for many patients caught in between managing their pain and receiving a transplant. In our database at our office, we know of over 24 patients that are going through this, and unfortunately half of them have passed away because they did not receive these transplants. People need to be allowed to take responsibility for themselves. You can't control everything. If I, as an adult, want to go watch a movie somewhere, I want to have a few tokes before I do, to make it more fun, that's my decision. It's not harming anybody. It's not harming me. But I know if I went to the cinema and had a large Coca-Cola, I probably wouldn't sleep that night because it's full of caffeine, which is actually a drug. And I don't drink fizzy drinks a lot, but when I do, it keeps me up all night. But we don't ban caffeine. You know, how many people do you know in the office or whatever that need their fix of coffee every morning? And if they don't, they're irritable, their thinking's cloudy, they can't do their job very well. You can abuse anything. People abuse chocolate. to cover up anxiety. It's a comfort food. And people get in nasty cycles of binging on bad food because they're unhappy about themselves. Then they look in the mirror and they're even more unhappy about themselves. Do we ban chocolate because it causes depression? Or is it that life causes depression? As a society, I think we need to grow up. And that doesn't mean we force children to smoke pot in the womb. I'm just saying responsible adults should be allowed to do what they want to their bodies, as long as they're not harming somebody else. And they certainly shouldn't be left to die because they've taken a substance that helps them with pain. And I just want to go to an old Ron Paul clip from the 80s on the Morton Downey Jr. show that at least demonstrates that we've come a little further in terms of public perception about individual freedom than the position we were in back then. Check this crazy clip out.
You're talking about people's freedom. Listen, the only thing you could be president of is Disneyland because you are in another world.
You don't make any sense.
All right. Let me come back to the Libertarian candidate for President of the United States, former Congressman Ron Paul. Ron, what's wrong with taking away some drug dealers now, notice I'm saying, yacht or limousine when drugs are found aboard? I mean, I happen to like zero tolerance.
Well, zero tolerance has been real good for our movement, too. Finally, the people got fed up and realized that zero tolerance was total destruction of privacy in the Constitution. So we're delighted with it. This is now the mayor of Baltimore and the mayor of Washington now has come out and said, you know, maybe we better look at the libertarian alternative. They say, maybe the drug laws aren't working. Maybe we should look for freedom and liberty as an explanation on letting the responsibility go back to the individual to make decisions about eating habits, sexual habits, smoking habits. Oh, hush.
Probably got beautiful cars.
You know, we tried that in the 60s, and that's
yeah,
what got
well,
us
you
in
don't
the jam
understand
we are
what
in
freedom
today.
is all about.
No,
and
you
freedom
don't
works
understand about the streets. I can tell you about what goes on
we all
on
know
the
about
streets.
the streets.
Yeah.
Oh, yeah, I can tell.
That's right.
The drug laws created the streets.
Before you were
People
born,
like you
we knew
create
about
the
the
problem.
And
Well,
they-
You're the problem. You're the problem.
you were
Joe,
born.
Joe,
Yeah,
too
bad you
wait a
give
second,
the...
Lisa, let me ask Joe, do you have any problem with revoking driver's licenses of drug users or searching a house given probable cause?
I have no problem with that. I have no problem
And
with
shooting
taking
them
their
too?
liberty away because
And
they've given
shooting
it.
them?
I have no problem.
And shooting them?
If they
when
shoot
they don't
it,
have drugs?
if they
because
shoot
they made a
it,
mistake?
if they shoot at me, my friend,
Because
their
they made a
ass is
mistake,
mine. I'll
shoot
tell you
them?
that right
well,
now.
they'll be in and check on you and your religion
You
and
can
call
shoot
it a
me. You
cult.
come right ahead, my friend, and
They'll
check
call
on
it a
me.
cult and
I'll
they'll put
stand a
you out
better
of
check
business.
than you will, you stupid idiot, you.
You know, I love the thinking machine called the liberal brain. No guns. Guns are terrible. Defense against guns,
well,
all right?
we've been listening
Who do
to-
we read in the paper? Shot a guy,
Carl
Carl Rowland. Carl Rowland, who's been saying no, we should have guns.
Put
They're
the
a
money
bunch
where
of
the
phonies and
loudmouths
they're a
are.
bunch of hypocrites.
Let's put
Oh,
the
we're
money
We
not
have
gonna
not
do
yet.
that.
Wait a minute. You got your piece. Can
No,
I
I
say
You're
didn't.
from the
something?
Hells Angels.
No.
Yeah. Where are you from? You from the Hells Angels? I never heard of it. You sound like the Hells Angels.
I guess your brain is too fried by drugs
Hey.
to regard
Hey.
I can't wait.
Joe,
Wouldn't it be a wonderful thing for this guy to be president and get into a debate with somebody from Russia? Can you hear this guy screaming?
At least I wouldn't be from George Bush and the CIA dealing in drugs, right,
This guy is
folks?
unbelievable.
Right? Yeah, George Bush and the CIA dealing in drugs. It'll be a lot better debate.
Before we start to legalize drugs, Mort, I would like to at
Let's
least...
legalize freedom. We don't want to legalize drugs. We want to
Let's-
legalize
wait,
freedom. Freedom of choice.
You want to give it away. Who do you want to surrender to, Peru?
Freedom. Freedom, liberty.
Let's at least, before we give in to this idea of legalizing drugs,
Let's
which is
fight
going
the
to create
war.
a
Yeah,
war.
war.
Shut up a minute, Otto.
Let us fight a real war
All right.
with real truth,
Good.
make a real commitment,
Good.
and get these phony
Good.
hypocrites out of
Good.
there.
You're the 50% of the people in prisons have to rob
How
in
much
order to get the
legal
money
drugs
to
are you
buy
gonna
the
give a
drugs.
person?
Let me
to keep
introduce
the
this
CIA
gentleman.
fighting their illegal war.
Let me go to loudmouth number 2. Mr. Ostrowski, would you? Go ahead, Colonel.
We keep going back to Bush and the CIA and the illegal war.
You
It was
bring
the
it up
liberal
to it.
Congress, Mr. President, that caused the victory.
Thank you. Thank you.
It
Thank
was the
you.
liberal Congress
Hey.
that that caused Ollie North to have to go over on an Irish
And
passport.
disobey the Constitution is what he did.
And the fact that a nut like you can run.
Tear the Constitution up and threw it in the trash.
It's either right or it's wrong, and you're wrong.
The fact that a nut like you can run for president shows just how much freedom we have.
And destroyed our Constitution. Matter of fact, he had a plan to rewrite the
Vote
Constitution.
for it, but it won't be for Ron Paul.
Bo,
Vote for
let
tyranny.
me ask you something. 1964, and you got this jaboni in the White House. Would you go over to Vietnam and serve for him?
No, there would be no Vietnam Wars if the libertarians are
There'd be no nation! There'd be no nation! There'd be no
money here at home.
We'll be back in a second. Get out of here. And I would like to come to the Libertarian presidential candidate.
Yes, I think we deserve a minute on what you indicate. You said if the libertarians in charge, there would be no America. Clearly, let me challenge some of you who may be even leaning toward the conservative philosophy. Ask me why we still finance the communists. Ask me why 70% of the military budget is spent overseas. Ask me why the good airplanes are overseas and the lousy airplanes are not here in the lousy airplanes are in the Air National Guard. I would say clean out the State Department, spend more money on our national defense, have an anti-communist policy. Don't sign these treaties with the Soviets. Don't extend loans to the Soviet Union. And not to fight these wars with the funds we raise from the illegal drugs. So under the libertarian society, no, we don't fight Vietnam Wars. We don't fight the Korean Wars. We fight wars to defend America, and we stand for America.
Baby.
We stand for freedom.
We get high.
Excuse me.
Yes, we get high. We get high, boy. We get high on the ideas of freedom. We get high because freedom and liberty is worth defending. Just say no. Assume the responsibility of yourself. Don't assume the government makes your decision. You say no. Don't say the government do it. You say no. You have the courage to do it.
I think I detect his voice changing. Maybe his cojones are getting small.
No Nos Against Drugs. It's a program geared primarily down to kindergarten. We do it through music, a cartoon character called Little No-No, the drug fighter. No one else in the United States is giving us a hand.
Is a tyrannical approach to solving a social medical problem, and we endorse the idea of voluntarism and self-responsibility, family, friends, and churches to solve problems, rather than saying some monolithic government is going to make you take care of yourself and be a better person. It's a preposterous notion. It never worked. It never will. The government can't make you a better person. It can't make you follow good habits. Why don't they put you on a diet? You're a little overweight, and I think you'd be in better health.
You're a little short down.
You want to make president? You're a little short down.
I'm tired of people like you.
Have the government do
I'm
that.
tired of people like you using the Constitution to do whatever you want to do. If we legalize drugs, we're giving up on the whole country.
Okay, welcome back, folks. The big irony of that clip, it was from the 80s, is that the host is constantly smoking cigarettes through the show. This guy, Morton Downey Jr., kind of a pioneer of trash TV, kind of, Jerry Springer type stuff. He actually died of lung cancer. So a bit of karma there on the side of Ron Paul. And let's look at the facts. Did we win the drug war? It's now 2012. Did we win the drug war? Are there no longer crackheads in the ghetto? Did all the dealers go away? Of course not. Anyway, we're going to move on to our next story. Speaking of things that do dangerous things to your mind, how about school? Psychological trauma coming to a primary school near you. UK schoolchildren have once again been frightened after a careless stunt allegedly used to improve their creative writing. 9 and 10-year-olds attending the Wincheap Foundation Primary School in Canterbury were interrupted mid-lesson by a commotion outside. As they were encouraged to peer out the window, they saw their school caretaker abducted by a man wearing a red wig. The kidnapper forced the caretaker at gunpoint into a vehicle before speeding out of the school grounds. In reality, it wasn't a real abduction. The man in the red wig was Clive Close, the school headmaster. What appeared to be a gun was actually an old water tap used as a prop. The whole incident had been premeditated as part of a bizarre teaching method allegedly used to spark children's imagination and help improve their creative writing in English lessons. The most worrying aspect of the incident, however, was not the performance itself. A lack of visual stimulation in classrooms is a major criticism of modern teaching, but rather the fact that pupils were first led to believe the incident was real. One parent commented, "There are a lot of other ways they could have debated something like that." Although Deputy Head Nicola Dawson was quick to remind parents of how it was helping them in the league tables, these sorts of things have had a huge impact on our writing results. Parents did not appreciate their children being left scared. I am of the opinion, as are several other parents, that primary school children should not be scared stiff in class, remarked another parent. This shock and awe approach to school lessons has slowly sneaked into the curriculum over the past few years, without a clear explanation as why pupils have to be lied to. Surely the same kind of performance could be used for the same ends, without blurring the lines between reality and fiction. Imagine the giggling and fun that would have been had if the kids were informed beforehand and then watched their teachers goofing around in a performance. Instead, children are more often than not left traumatized. And this sort of thing particularly worries me. I mean, we talked about the drug issue just now, but at least with that, you can see where people are coming from. There's misinformation, there's a lot of propaganda, there's a lot of money involved, particularly in the anti-marijuana lobby. You know, alcohol and tobacco companies lobbying against legalization of marijuana because it would cut their profits. Drug companies staying away from it because it's a plant and can't easily be patented. If it was legal, you know, everyone would be able to grow it. There are understandable reasons why some people go, "Oh no," when you say you smoke pot. But with this headline, it's hard to wrap your head around why it's happening. Who's sitting in a school staff room and saying, "Oh, let's traumatize the children today. That's a good idea." How? Why? Who have we let into the school system? Where is this coming from? What part of the curriculum? What has happened to the teachers? And you could brush it off if it was an isolated incident, and there just happened to be a few morons that read the lesson guidelines incorrectly or whatever. But this is a constant theme that's been happening all over the country. As first reported by The Telegraph, in July 2009 at Southway Junior School in Burgess Hill, West Sussex, children saw a spaceship crash near their school, and then aliens grabbed a member of staff as part of the performance. The Alien Invasion show, which was supported by Sussex police, took place without parents being informed, leaving some furious that they had to comfort their terrified children. Police contributed to the invasion by providing sirens and flashing blue lights to signify the landing of the craft just before morning classes on July 10th. It wasn't made clear to some students even after the staged events that it was indeed a performance. One unnamed mother recounted her story. "God only knows what the school was playing at. I mean, to shock children into thinking that the aliens have landed and have abducted a teacher is just a little too much for 7-year-olds to take. My daughter was deeply upset and came home looking shell-shocked. She wasn't sure what had happened and really wanted to know that everything was going to be alright." In your rational thinking mind, does any of that make sense? I mean, if you were a teacher, would you be doing that? Maybe aliens have taken over the teachers and that's why it's happening. It's just totally bizarre. You know, it's almost like an experiment or some kind of psychological programming. I think someone dropped the name Common Purpose there in the chat, and I know Brian Gerrish of the UK Column website and newspaper has quite a bit of anecdotal evidence of some of these unpleasant mind tricks that he claims are being carried out on people by authority, whether that's in schools or workplaces and things, neuro-linguistic programming and things like that. I don't know 100% what to make of Gerrish's work. It's definitely interesting. I'm not sure he's too forthcoming with the supposed evidence that he says he has. I wish he'd just dump it out online or something. Maybe he has, maybe someone could drop a link in, but what's happening in these classrooms is bizarre. What's the reasonable explanation? Do we literally have schools all around the country that are now just employing complete brain dead morons, or is there some kind of agenda? In November 2009, at the Foxhill Primary School in Sheffield, children arriving at the school in the morning were greeted with a pool of blood and a police crime scene. One female member of staff in on the act pretended to have been assaulted, and some children were then tasked to help police in the investigation under the impression the attacker could still be on the school grounds. The school made no attempt to put the traumatized children's minds at ease because the alleged problem-solving exercise wasn't exposed as such until 4 days into the week. One parent told the Telegraph, "I think it's disgusting. The children are too frightened to go back to school because it has not been made clear that it's a fictitious incident." St Hilary's Primary School in Lanarkshire, Scotland, has also undertaken similar stunts. As reported by Mail Online, a group of stunned primary school children began crying when their teacher told them during a bizarre Holocaust game that they were to be taken away from their families. The pupils aged 11 became upset after a number of them were segregated and told they were being sent away or might end up in an orphanage. The ordeal was meant to give the youngsters at the Lanarkshire school an insight into the horrors faced by Jewish children during World War II. What? I mean, that doesn't make any sense. Do they think there was a young Hitler in the class that they needed to make feel empathy for Jewish children? What's wrong with playing a video? I'm pretty sure if you showed young kids a frank and honest DVD about World War II with some, grim footage and some scary music, they'll get the idea. You don't need to tell the kids that they're going to be orphans, you sick morons. One parent who stood up to the system and lodged an official complaint wrote, "Mrs. McGlynn told the children that they would probably have to be sent away from their families and that their parents had been informed about this and knew all about it. When one child asked if that meant they might have to go to an orphanage, they were told that that might be a possibility. At that point, many of the children became very distressed." Are you kidding me? Who is this old hag, Mrs. McGlynn? How can she stand up there and say that to children? There seems to be a bit of Hitler in her, to be honest. Some crusty old, emotionless, empty witch. She should be the furthest away from children as possible. One boy kicked his chair over and was very angry and demanded to speak to someone in charge, but most were crying on a scale ranging from mildly to severely. Their ordeal lasted between 12 and 15 minutes before the children were informed that it was all an act, but that the role play would continue until lunchtime. You know who should have gotten a gold star? The kid who kicked his chair over and demanded to speak to somebody. That's somebody that's got the right idea. That's a kid that can stick up for themselves in the face of authority. He should have been used as an example to the other kids on how you should react under authoritarianist regimes. There weren't enough people in Nazi Germany kicking their chairs over like that kid. Should have been used as, an example of having self-respect and freedom. That would have been a perfect lesson afterwards. But no doubt Mrs. McGlynn probably told him off. In March 2010, at the Blackminster Middle School in Evesham, Worcester, children were left crying and traumatized when they saw a man brandishing a gun shoot dead Richard Kent, their science teacher, as he ran across the school field. Following a loud bang simulating a gunshot, other staff involved in the act rushed to the teacher's aid and appeared to try to resuscitate him. There was a delay of 10 minutes before weeping pupils were taken back to the assembly hall, where teachers explained that the pretend shooting had been laid out as part of a science lesson. Some children were so upset that they were sick afterwards, parents said. Yeah, it should be used as a science lesson, a lesson on how some teachers are so brain dead they think staging a shooting is a good idea. What's the science behind that? What the hell's going on in their brain? Under the guise of problem solving, creative writing or science, the UK's children are being exposed to psychological trauma. Whether this is for a deliberate purpose or due to a complete lack of common sense is not clear. The most worrying aspect despite criticisms and media coverage that shows children are being frightened, schools carry on regardless and don't even inform parents beforehand. Furthermore, in all cases, parents have done little to hold their schools accountable. Who are these people that think something like this could be a good idea? Where's their common sense gone? And I did a little bit of Googling. I did try and contact one of the schools, but I didn't really get any response. But we now know at least one of the culprits behind this method of teaching is the National Literacy Trust, although details are scant. In a 2011 resource available for teachers that looks at improving children's writing skills, it suggests try bringing in a local role model such as a fireman, or stage an alien invasion to stimulate creativity. Yeah, okay. According to the NLT's website, for £75 per school per year, up to 5 members of staff can register to gain access to their resources. There is also a leaders network that brings consultants, lead teachers, coordinators, librarians, advanced skills teachers and other leaders together, and may be where these kinds of ideas have sprung up from. It should be noted that the Trust is an independent charity, and it's not clear what safeguards are in place to prevent it from promoting these bizarre and possibly dangerous programs. Leaders network, eh? I mean, do you really know who is looking after your kids when you send them to school? Do you really know what kind of agendas there may be? I know Bluebus, who is up next with the reality check show, he homeschools his daughter, I believe. Maybe that's the way parents should be going these days. If we can no longer trust our schools to even have basic common sense, like don't scare the children witless, what else can you do? If it was another pupil that had pretended to have a gun, or had set something up to scare another kid, then they'd have been told off. They'd have got detention. Their parents might have been called. But it's okay when authority does it. Moving on to our other headline today, it's also okay for authority to lie, as more and more people are getting used to. I mean, when is there a time when our politicians aren't lying? And this is on Lockerbie. Lockerbie bomber was innocent. New documents support the obvious. And actually, I'm going to take a quick break, and then we can come back and get into this article a little bit more. Let me find a decent song. Okay, welcome back to the WideShut Webcast with me, Keelan Balderson. Lockerbie bomber was innocent. New documents support the obvious. New documents shed further doubt over the evidence used to convict a Libyan man for the bombing of Pan Am Flight 103 over Lockerbie, Scotland on December 21st, 1988. Abdul Basit Ali Mohammed al-Megrahi was convicted in 2001 and released on bizarre compassionate grounds in 2009 amidst rumours of oil deals. He was the only person to serve prison time for the crime. This new evidence and a review of the case makes it almost certain he was innocent. Among the wreckage of the plane, which was carrying mainly US and UK passengers en route to JFK International, were small fragments of a circuit board alleged to be part of the bomb's timer, which were found in a wooded area many miles from the immediate scene. The prosecution, using supposed CIA and FBI experts, asserted that the fragment examined was an exact match of a series of timers sold to the Libyan government. However, newly released documents have revealed that the fragment was actually quite different. Instead of the tin and lead compound found on the Libyan circuit boards, the fragment contained pure tin. It was not an exact match. The evidence was discovered by a British Ministry of Defence scientist, but was never passed to Megrahi's lawyers, implying that the Libyan had been deliberately set up. In response to the new findings, an MOD spokesperson told Al Jazeera that the board was likely modified before use, and this explains the difference. However, this was never explored in the trial or backed up by any independent analysis. So just because the MOD say so, we're supposed to believe them. Just because they say, oh, it must have been, they must have changed it before they used it. Well, they withheld the evidence. They said it was an exact match. And this scientist, who was looking over the fragments, found out that it wasn't, and withheld that evidence. And now they're trying to lie their way out of it, basically. As if they've got any credibility. This is not the first claim that the circuit board evidence was fraudulent. Even the UK Guardian reported in 2007 that the fragment was a probable fake. This, however, didn't stop the mainstream media invoking Lockerbie to win public support for the disastrous campaign against Gaddafi in 2011. You see, and that's the thing with the mainstream media. It's very fickle. You sometimes get the truth, it's sometimes hidden away in the back pages of the newspaper, but they never repeat it. The government creates a narrative and anything outside of it is ignored again, even if they've reported it prior to, the official story being peddled. Or they change their mind suddenly when a government spokesperson says this or that. Well, if the government spokesperson is wrong, then why don't you say that he's wrong? How can you report evidence exposing the official story one day and then ignore it the next? It's like the death of bin Laden. Several news outlets reported that he died in 2001. They had experts on talking about his, kidney disease? He was on dialysis. They reported that he died. Taliban leaders said they attended the funeral. Then the same outlets report that he died last year in a compound in Pakistan. Which is it? Who's lying? As a member of the public, the only way we ever get to the truth is by reading between the lines. And trusting our instincts, really, because a lot of the time you can't even tell what, quote, facts are actually facts. Edwin Bollier, the now elderly former owner of the company that created the timers, told The Guardian in 2000, 2007. 2 years before Lockerbie, we sold 20 MST-13 timers to the Libyan military. FBI agents and Scottish investigators said one of those timers had been used to detonate the bomb. He became a defense witness because of unease about the fragments he was shown. They did not match the circuit boards his company produced. I was shown fragments of a brown circuit board, which matched our prototype, but when the MST-13 went into production, the timers contained green boards. I knew that the timers sold to Libya had been green. But we'll ignore what the owner of the company says because the FBI know better than he does. He further claims during the trial that the evidence had been tampered with. The trial was so skewed to prove Libyan involvement that the details of what I had to say were ignored. A photograph of the fragments was produced in court, and I asked to see the pieces again. When they were brought to me, they were practically carbonized. They had been tampered with since I had seen them in Dumfries. The prosecution's star witness at the trial was a man named Tony Gorsi, a shop owner from Malta, or Gorchi. He identified Megrahi as a man who had bought clothing and an umbrella from him on December 7th, 1988, remnants of which were later recovered from debris at the scene. However, the 2007 Scottish Criminal Case Review Commission, the SCCRC investigation, which has been almost completely ignored by the media, supported an appeal by Megrahi, citing Gauchi's testimony as unreliable. It was established that the only date Megrahi could have purchased the clothes were on December 7th, but they determined that there was no reasonable basis in the trial court's judgment for its conclusion that the purchase of items from Mary's house took place on that day. So basically they're saying there's no evidence that he actually bought them on that day, but it's the only day he could have bought them. The Commission's statement elaborates, and this is from the PDFs. New evidence not heard at the trial concerned the date on which the Christmas lights were illuminated in the area of Sleima, in which Mary's house is situated. In the Commission's view, taken together with Mr. Gauchi's evidence at trial and the contents of his police statements, this additional evidence indicates that the purchase of the items took place prior to 6th of December 1988. In other words, it indicates that the purchase took place at a time when there was no evidence at trial that the applicant was in Malta. 4 days prior to the identification parade of which Mr. Gorchi picked out Megrahi, he saw a photograph of him in a magazine article linking him to the bombing. In the Commission's view, evidence of Mr. Gauchi's exposure to this photograph in such close proximity to the parade undermines the reliability of his identification of the applicant at that time and at the trial itself. Gauchi and his brother were paid millions for their cooperation, or as some might interpret, were paid off for their false testimony. You see, the slightest bit of, reading up about this case, some of the official investigations, and it's quite clear that the evidence is not there. But they just go along with it anyway. The media goes along with it anyway. You had the Sun newspaper, massive bold headline. This is for Lockerbie after we just obliterated Libya and handed it over to Al-Qaeda-linked rebels. Getting everybody emotionally involved. Oh, we had to do it because, Gaddafi and this Libyan bloke did Lockerbie. Well, no, he didn't. I'm afraid he didn't. Hans Kochler, a UN international observer, called the whole case a spectacular miscarriage of justice and criticised the SCCRC for being too lenient on those in charge of bringing justice. So even though the SCCRC come out and said that, look, the evidence is rubbish, even official observers for the UN are saying they didn't even go far enough in their criticisms. Regrettably, the SCCRC has not disclosed all its grounds of referral, and in its news release on 28th of June has basically concentrated on the dubious role of Maltese witness Tony Gorchi, while at the same time engaging in a rather strange exercise of preventative exoneration of certain people belonging to the British and or Scottish police and judicial system, whose behaviour, as pointed out in the undersigned's report and confirmed in the meantime in several affidavits, has been highly questionable and may have detrimentally affected the fairness of the proceedings. So basically the men in suits get away with it, get away with lying, get away with hiding the evidence, get away with rubbish testimonies, and he's calling them to task. McGrahy was eventually released, but under dubious circumstances, and that's the compassionate grounds thing. Taking into account this evidence, it became a big surprise when McGrahy suddenly dropped his appeal, because the evidence was on his side. BBC News reports that a new book by longtime Lockerbie researcher John Ashton claims the government struck a deal with McGrahy to drop his appeal in exchange for being released on compassionate grounds due to suffering from cancer. This would allow the government to continue to save face on the wrongful conviction, but allow McGrahy to have his freedom. He was released back to Libya in August 2009. Oil company BP admitted that it had pushed for a prisoner transfer agreement prior to the compassionate release because of negative consequences delaying a deal with Libya would have had on commercial interests. So what they're saying is they should have sped this up so they didn't lose money. Good old BP. Nevertheless, the Libyans learned a cold hard lesson not to cooperate with lying imperialists. They were soon stabbed in the back when NATO obliterated the country in an unjust bombing campaign, and David Cameron told the Al-Qaeda-linked rebels to lock McGrahy back up if they found him. The whereabouts of McGrahy are no longer known, but it was last reported that he was in a coma prior to the NATO campaign. So David Cameron instructed Al-Qaeda-linked militants to lock up an innocent man if they found him. And this is our supposed leader, folks. This is the person we're supposed to look to. This is the person supposedly running the country. Does he sound like a moral man? Does he sound like he wants justice? Or does he sound like a politician? According to victim family member Martin Cademan, during a President's Commission on Aviation Security and Terrorism review, one of President Bush Sr.'s staff told him, "Your government and ours know exactly what happened, but they're never going to tell." So the million-dollar question remains, if McGrahy was innocent, who bombed Pan Am Flight 103? And if you follow the link to the article that I pasted in, there's a pretty lengthy article, again in The Guardian, all the way back in 1995, that basically lists a series of different pieces of information. They don't really make a conclusion, it's not really dealt with in a particularly serious manner, but it does list a lot of the anomalies. You know, there was prior knowledge from different countries, officials told not to fly, you know, bomb threats and all sorts of weird things that suggest they knew something was going to happen. It's been linked to Palestinian terror groups. It's been linked to Iran. You know, all sorts of different lines of inquiry. The persistent one that seems to keep coming back is the idea of some kind of drug running operation that needed to be silenced in some way. I think I pasted this in here. Let me find it. The writer may have forgotten I for inside job, because he basically listed the alphabet and had a bit of information for each letter. I for inside job. Although it's complete speculation at this time, it's possible one of the Western intelligence agencies staged a false flag attack as a pretext to take out Gaddafi. Former British agent Annie Machon notes in her book Spies, Lies and Whistleblowers that in the 90s MI6 paid an Al-Qaeda terrorist to assassinate Gaddafi, which resulted in the failed attack on his motorcade in 1996. It's clear there has always been a hidden agenda to get rid of him. Equally, in the 1984 shooting of police lady Yvonne Fletcher outside the Libyan embassy in London, which was officially blamed on Libyans within the embassy, It was exposed in a rare Channel 4 piece as most likely being carried out from an adjacent building occupied by the British security services. They suggest a Libyan opposition group with ties to the CIA and Reagan administration carried out the attack as a false flag to prompt Britain to wrongfully retaliate against Gaddafi. Although the CIA drug-running theory has been dismissed by the mainstream media, Susan Lindauer of Veterans Today has a very credible account of what may have gone down. And this is what she writes in her article. Let me just paste that in. In December 1988, infuriated Defense Intelligence agents issued a formal protest exposing CIA complicity in Middle East heroin trafficking. When teams from both agencies got summoned back to Washington to attend an internal hearing, they boarded Pan Am Flight 103, a wing of militant Hezbollah led by Ahmed Jibril, his nephews Abu Elias and Abu Talab. I'm butchering these names, by the way, took out both teams in order to protect their lucrative cartel. Classified defense intelligence records show that Jibril and Talab had been toying with a conspiracy to bomb the US airplane during the 1988 Christmas holidays anyway. They planned to bomb a US airliner in revenge for the USSS, I can't even say that word, but some American airplane that shot down an Iranian commercial airliner loaded with Hajis returning from Mecca. So they're basically saying they retaliated. However, the defense intelligence threat to expose their heroin network put the bombing plan into action. Islamic Jihad's ability to discover actionable intelligence on the flight schedules would definitely confirm that somebody at CIA was operating as a double agent, keeping Islamic Jihad a step ahead of the rescue effort. And you can read more of that at that link there on Veterans Today. I mean, there's all sorts of different leads that people really need to go down. I mean, we've had 9/11, we've had 7/7, and because it was more modern incidents, people have poured through everything and fully gone through all the details and shared it with other people on the internet, and other people have picked it apart and come up with more accurate information and so on. But a lot of these older events are a little less covered, and I think if you want to come to your own conclusions, the best thing is to read up on all the different possible scenarios there. I personally do not have a conclusion. But from that, I can tell that it definitely wasn't McGrahy that did it. And I think I'm going to call it a night, folks. Don't forget to check out Blue Bus at 9:30 here on resistradio.com with the Reality Check show. But I'll catch you next week, and I might actually stay here and play some tunes to keep you occupied so you don't drift off and forget that Blue Bus is actually next. So take care, everybody, and I'll talk to you next week.
If you found the preceding information valuable, please consider buying a DVD or making a small donation of your choosing. Go to wideshut.co.uk/donate. That's wideshut.co.uk/donate. You are the resistance.